The story I'm about to tell you is probably the reason that you and I get to have this conversation today. So it's just after midnight on September 26th, 1983. Why do things always happen at midnight? It's kind of like Shrek or that Eric Clapton song where it's after midnight, we're going to let it all hang out. But this was no time for a song or a dance. A Soviet soldier is covering his friend's shift, as we talk about, and he has 15 minutes not to decide to save on his car insurance, but to decide whether or not to start World War III. The computer that his buddy should be manning right now is telling him the United States has just launched a nuclear attack. His training says you got to do it. You got to hit that button. But his gut says something's wrong. The Soviet Union is destroyed if he doesn't report this. Our main character today is Stanislav Petrov, and almost nobody knows him, but we all should. Heck, I honestly had no idea who he was until I was studying an episode on how the microwave witch is invented. By the way, you can listen to that here. And how I got to learning about how the microwave was invented by a chocolate bar to this story is a story in itself. The truth remains, though, that he was at this console, not in his cozy house sipping a drink. He's sitting in a post in a bunker 60 kilometers south of Moscow, monitoring the Soviet Union's nuclear early warning system. It's a routine night. Nothing was happening, just like his friend said. Then the alarm goes off. On the wall, the letters burn to life in big red letters. One word: launch. The years 1982 and 83 were the most dangerous of the entire Cold War. In June of 1982, in an address to the British Parliament, then U.S. President Ronald Reagan stated, "The Soviets preach the supremacy of the state, declare its omnipotence over individual man, and predict its eventual domination of all peoples on earth. They are the focus of evil in the modern world." End quote. And then, about a year or so later, in March, in an address to the U.S., he announced a space-based weapon program designed to shoot down Soviet missiles. To the Kremlin, this pretty much meant that the U.S. was waiting for a strike to happen, and they wouldn't have any fear or retaliation from Russia. To make matters much, much worse, on September 1st, 1983, a Soviet fighter plane shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007. It was a Boeing 747 carrying 269 passengers and crew, and the aircraft actually inadvertently drifted into restricted Soviet airspace. Everybody on board, sadly, was killed, and that included a U.S. Congressman, Lawrence McDonald. The world, it was already on knife's edge because of the Cold War, and this made it its boiling point. And the Soviets, they were becoming defensive and a little bit paranoid, as you could probably imagine. And imagine with all of this going on, by the night of our story, September 26th, the Soviet military wasn't exactly in a state of calm analysis, and mostly they were not going to be the cooler heads that were going to prevail. They were on high alert for an American attack at this point. Sadly, but also thankfully, that's the room Petrov walked into that night. Stanislav Petrov, he wasn't just a watchman. He actually was an engineer who had helped write the software that ran this early warning system. So he was in the right seat at the right time. Later on, I'll actually tell you about him saying that during his interviews, but that's basically how he thought. He knew it from the inside out. He also knew that it could fail. The system was called OKO. That's the Russian word for an eye. Satellites watching American missile sites around the clock. The moment any missile attack was detected or a missile launched, OKO detected that heat signature and triggered the alarm, and they would make a decision. Seems pretty simple, right? Now, I'm no expert by any means. I did a little bit of research, but from my reading, it would seem that the Soviet doctrine at that point was called launch on warning, meaning if the system detected an attack at all or gave any warnings at all, you didn't need to verify things and you didn't hesitate. You launched immediately. There was no time for hesitation. Before incoming missiles destroyed your ability to counter, that's what they were trying to go after. The entire system was designed to remove hesitation from the equation. That night, though, the system had a failsafe. The failsafe that night was Stanislav Petrov. Shortly after midnight, the sirens went off. I can't even imagine what that room was like. If you think of a room and you see a movie and there's all these people screaming and shouting and trying to get things, or like in the middle of a submarine, an attack or something like that, I can't even imagine. The scariest thing that's happened to you at your work, Take that and multiply it by a million times, and then multiply it again. Most likely, unless you maybe were an Apollo 13 astronaut and you were stuck in space for several days and you weren't sure if you're ever going to see Earth again, we can't come close to that. Petrov, though, knows the world is a mess. He also knows that all attentions are very high. One incoming American missile, it had high reliability. Whatever the conversations were in that room that were happening about maybe somebody's weekend plans or water cooler talk or some of the office gossip, those conversations, those had to have immediately stopped. The bunker probably went into some sort of controlled panic. Every eye then turned to Petrov. He was the one to make the decisions. He looked at the data. He looked at the data again. In his gut, something just didn't feel right. It reminds me of a conversation I recently had with a friend that stated, which is more important, logic or intuition? I quickly answered logic, and I fought pretty hard to tell my side of the story and why I thought that was the truth. But when I dove deeply into this story, I realized that sometimes intuition can, in fact, and maybe should win out. And you'll see this as the story continues. Petrov knew two things the computer system couldn't weigh. First, everything he understood about American strategy said a real first strike wouldn't just be one missile, it would be hundreds and hundreds of missiles. It makes no sense for the Americans to fire one missile at a country that can retaliate instantly with thousands in return. You wouldn't win. All you would do is start the war. Secondly, the OGO system was less than a year old. He watched it, he helped create it, and he had watched it glitch before. He knew it wasn't perfect. This is where his logic actually did kick in. He went and checked a secondary system, the ground radar. If a missile was in the air, ground radar should be picking it up. Ground radar wasn't showing anything. Then the computer updated, and this is where it really got scary. 4 more missiles were detected. Now 5 incoming missiles were heading straight towards Russia. Okay, now imagine what the noise in the bunker was like right at that moment. People were scared, people were panicky, people were probably shouting, chaos. And meanwhile, the clock ticked down as Petrov had to evaluate his response. The pressure and the weight of this moment are insurmountable. In most cases, saying the fate of the world was in one man's hand, that's pretty cliche, but in this case, it was spot on. Petrov had a decision to make, and make his choice he did. He picked up the phone and said, "False alarm. The computer is malfunctioning. There is no attack." Here's the rub. He didn't know if he was right. He didn't know if he had just doomed Russia and cost millions of people their lives. People say that in tragedies like, say, a car accident or something that's really stressful, something in the hospital, that things happen in slow motion. Time seems to stand still. Something that takes just a split second seems like it's a couple of minutes. Well, the next several minutes for Petrov, while he sat at his desk, must have seemed like hours, just the intensity. He sat there waiting to see if the missiles were going to hit. None ever did. Everyone in that bunker must have had more stress in that 15 minutes than many of us experience in our lifetime. Later, an investigation determined that a rare alignment of sunlight, if you can believe that, reflecting off high altitude clouds had fooled the satellites into reading missile launched that weren't there. Petrov was right. And because of that, the world was still there. Quick note, if you're with me this far and you want the full extended version of this story, it is on the Archives and Anchovies podcast, audio only. The links are in the description. And like and subscribe if you genuinely like this show. It helps. But now, sadly, here's where the story is going to get a little more dark. As Oscar Wilde would say, no good deed goes unpunished. And after the investigation confirmed the false alarm, and after Petrov had been right about virtually everything and had made the correct choices, his superiors initially praised him. He was promised a reward. He was promised a promotion. Filling in for his friend that had been sick had saved the world, and it was probably going to be very lucrative for Petrov. But the reward never came. Nope. Instead, Petrov was reprimanded, if you can believe that. The official reason? Paperwork. During the 15 most consequential minutes maybe we've had in modern history while deciding whether to report a possible end of civilization attack on his country, Petrov had not been filling out his military logbook correctly. And I'm all for being exact, but come on, the guy made a decision that saved everyone's lives. It's just so unreal and unfathomable. He was formally reprimanded for incomplete documentation. The real reason he got in trouble, of course, was much, much deeper, as it usually is. The real reason was politics, plain and simple. The incident had exposed a catastrophic flaw in the Oko system, and this was built and championed by powerful people in the Soviet establishment. The thought was if Petrov was officially rewarded for showing that this was a flaw, those people would have to be officially held accountable and responsible. That wasn't going to happen. So instead of a reward and some accolades, Petrov got a reprimand, got reassigned, and got no promotion. He actually retired the following year after this incident, and not surprisingly, shortly after, had a mental breakdown. Even more remarkable, this is crazy. His wife knew nothing about what had happened for a decade. He was forbidden to discuss it with anyone. Imagine keeping that secret from your spouse. I mean, I have a hard enough time keeping secrets for Christmas presents and birthday presents and things like that. The stress that he had to have had living with that and not being able to tell the woman he loved, just, man. Anyway, he worked at a modern research institute on an army pension and ended up staying quiet. This incident stayed actually classified until the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And by the mid 1990s, there were some whispers and some things that came out about the story, and it began to leak out. When the world finally understood what had happened on that Tuesday night in 1983, the reaction was extraordinary, and for good reason. For more than 10 years, just think about it, 10 years, people went on living their lives because of this man, and nobody knew it. And nobody knew the toll it had taken on him, even more importantly. In 2006, even 10 years later, Petrov was invited to the United Nations. He received the World Citizen Award, and it was engraved with the words, "To the man who saved the world." Stanislav Petrov died on May 19th in 2017. He was 77 years old. What an extraordinary life he lived. He was alone in his apartment in Moscow, and he was in a small suburb. And maybe the saddest part of this entire story, not the reprimand, not the lack of promotion or having to stay silent, was nobody even knew he had died. Nobody noticed. Not a news outlet, not a government, not the United Nations that had given him an award. The man who saved the world died, and the world didn't notice for 4 months. Now, I've forgotten to wish somebody a happy birthday, and I've made that call, and I've gone and, ate humble pie. But the only reason the world found out about Petrov's death was when a German filmmaker called to wish him a happy birthday in September of that year. He died in May, so this is September. Petrov's son is the one that answered the phone and gave the world the news. I had mentioned earlier about another episode where a gentleman named Percy Spencer invented the microwave. It had to do with a chocolate bar melting in his pocket. And spoiler alert, he only got $2 as a reward for making the microwave. It seems chintzy, but you know what? That's way more than Petrov got for saving the world. Stanislav Petrov saved the world, got reprimanded and silenced. Where's the justice in that? And when he died, nobody even noticed he was gone for 4 months. Everything that I read, everything, made me feel sad about these kind of situations where extraordinary people, extraordinary men did things that either we've never heard of or that we take for granted. But honestly, that's actually why I started this podcast, because I find it interesting, and everything has a history, and these things need to be remembered. Well, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been really fun. It's a cool story. It deserves to be remembered. I very much enjoyed researching it and talking about it. If you all want, listen to the full version of the story on the Archives and Anchovies podcast, streaming on your favorite platform. And this is a video version. It's also available on YouTube if you're listening to a podcast right now. Links are in the description. And until next time, I wish you a great day, a pleasant night, and a wonderful week ahead. Thanks.